everybody. I know it's a hardship coming out into air-conditioned comfort on such a hot day. I'm glad you made the sacrifice. My name is John. I'm the curator here, and I'd like to welcome you to the third Thursday lunchtime lecture, where this month we're delighted to have Michele Pagan give a talk on the history of samplers. Michele grew up in Rutland County. I want to say West Rutland, but don't hold me to that. And she went to UVM and UConn. Has been involved with textile and museum work for longer than anyone wants to admit. And right now she's working on this sampler initiative that she'll be talking more about as well. So I'm going to shut up and give it over to Michele.
So for those of you who came late, please have a card. People back there. Pass these back to the back row, please. Yeah. Okay. So you know what? I think I'll start with the slideshow and then come back and explain the real live samplers for you to hand around if you like. Okay. So this is a talk that I gave actually back in July of last year up at the Peachum Historical Society. They were interested in knowing more about the socioeconomic clues that you can read when you know how to look at a sampler. Okay, so this is what we're going to talk about in this next hour. The Vermont Sampler Initiative, we already got started. You all have a card, right? And that's for you to save or give to a friend. Anybody you think might need to know about the Sampler Initiative, that we're looking to document all schoolgirl samplers, either made in Vermont or presently in Vermont. Either way, it doesn't have to be made in Vermont. Okay, I'm going to show you the anatomy of a sampler. What are the different bits and pieces? Types of samplers, because there's more than one type for sure. How to read a sampler. Then we'll really get into the socioeconomic clues that you can see reading a sampler. And then some sources for, if you see a name and a date on a sampler, how can you validate maybe where that sampler is really from? Is it supposed to be from Vermont? If it says it's from Dorset, is that Dorset, Vermont? Okay, so we're going to talk about that kind of thing. All right, so, and then lastly, I'm going to tell you that next summer 2025, there's going to be a sampler driving tour. And I'm working on confirming all of the sites where people could drive around, hopefully coming to the Dorset Historical Society. So you need to join me in convincing John that he should be part of the sampler driving tour next summer. Okay, so we'll end on that slide. Okay, so as I kind of briefly mentioned, there's such a thing online as the samplerarchive.org. It's a national search for all schoolgirl samplers. And you can click on it right now and see the bulk of what has already been identified in places like Delaware. You see the Winter Tour collection at the University of Delaware is online. Rhode Island is online. Parts of Pennsylvania are online. You won't see any Vermont pieces yet because the directors want every sampler to be thoroughly researched before it goes online. Well, guess what? As a result of 2 weeks ago, we've now identified more than 750 Vermont samplers. Wow. And yet, when you pick up any book about American schoolgirl needlework, there won't be one Vermont sampler in there. And so this is really groundbreaking. It's very exciting to be part of, being able to harness the internet, harness what you can do with Ancestry and Family Search to find information that nobody ever knew about before. So this effort is really, really groundbreaking. So this is the Sampler Archive. It's a special project of the people who run the Sampler Consortium to document schoolgirl samplers and other types of embroideries made by schoolgirls in the U.S. So we're not putting on the website British samplers. A lot of people collect British samplers. It's nice to know about them. We photograph them if they show up at a Sampler ID Day, but it will not be going on to the Sampler Archive. Okay, so this is the kind of thing we have been doing just since, not even 2 years now, since November 2022, starting at the Bennington Museum, we have been hosting what we call Sampler ID Days. The Bennington Museum one was the first. Then last year we had Shelburne Museum in April, the Vermont Historical Society in May, the Wyndham County Historical Society last July, and then, like I say, 2 weeks ago, Friday and Saturday, we were way up in Brownington, way up in the Northeast Kingdom. The Old House Museum alone has 26 samplers. So but we only identified 60 over the course of 2 days. At the Bennington, we had over 100, just for comparison's sake. And because we are an all-volunteer organization, people are welcome to make a donation. We're all volunteer except for we do have to hire a young man, you know, he's young, he's maybe 50, to do the professional photography for us. So he does have to be paid for. So if you'd like to make a donation, we'd love to know about it. Okay, so as I said, schoolgirl embroidery includes samplers and other kinds of what's called pictorial needlework. One was considered very poorly educated. This is why girls did a sampler. You were considered very poorly educated who could not exhibit a sampler. Some of these were large and elaborate specimens of handiwork, framed and glazed, glazed meaning they had a sheet of glass over the front. Okay? They often formed the chief ornament of the sitting room, the front parlor, in other words, or the best room in the house. Okay? So and another, this woman also, Sarah Emery also wrote in another one of her treatises that it was as important for a girl to produce a sampler as it was for a boy to learn to read. That's how important, okay? So girls had to learn to read also, but theirs had to be real functional. You know, they had to be able to mark the family linens and do embroidered cuffs and, you know, all kinds of fancy work too. Okay, so the anatomy of a sampler. This is one by Fidelia Goodrich from Richmond, Vermont, done in 1832. And when we look at the design of a sampler to decide maybe how much it's worth these days, right? You look at the borders of the sampler. We're talking, the borders are here now, all right? How fancy is that border that goes all the way around? How fancy are the dividing lines? You see, like this? There's another box right here, isn't there? Okay. What kind of text? Is the text just ABCs? Sometimes it is. A girl's first sampler might be just her ABCs. That's how she started, age 5. All right, we're talking girls very, very young, and it's quite impressive what they can do even by age 9. Yeah.
Good question. Were there any young men that did samples?
There were. Very rare, but there were. Especially if it was a situation for a young boy was sitting by somebody's bedside who was bedridden for a long, long time, and he had to take his turn at the bedside, he might also then be working a sampler. Yeah, good question, but very rare. They're out there, but I haven't seen one yet here in Vermont, but they are there. So the text might be just ABCs. There might be a verse. There might be we call her signature, which is her name, her age, how many years old she was, where she was from, etc. And then the various motifs and what kind of condition they're in. You know, the motifs around here are fancier. A lot fancier stitches were used to make the motifs usually than were used to make an ABC. A through Z would be all one type of stitch normally. The next alphabet, and most often there were 3 sets of alphabets, all right? Uppercase A through Z, smaller case A through Z, and then cursive letters. We all know what cursive is, right? Cursive letters A to Z, and then usually numbers 1 to 10. That was pretty basic.
But signature is not in cursive.
Sometimes it was.
Oh.
Sometimes not. Okay, so that's basically what we're looking at when we look at the design of a sampler. So this is what happens when we call up and when we document a sampler at a sampler ID day. We have the picture, and then we run through, so this was at the Bennington Museum, as you can see. It was made by Charlotte Cheever with no date on it. And these are all the 8 levels of investigation that we do, 8 ways that we document a sampler as part of a sampler ID day. So if you look up on the Sampler Archive, you could click on any one of these and all that information will pop up. Okay, so let's start with the types of samplers, and let's start with the marking samplers. And the 2 on the left, actually they're all 3 from the blood family. The 2 on the left are very basic, primitive style, shall we say. And actually we have one here might want to hand around. This is a very primitive marking sampler with a little bit of verse, actually, that's been started. This is interesting because this is the most primitive one, wouldn't you say? It's the most monochromatic. It's just A through Z, and I believe this is the woman's initials, A and B. B for blood. This is her daughter's very most plain marking sampler a generation later. It's a little fancier, right? Can you see there's a little more color here, right? So more colors were available, more money was available perhaps to be able to buy the additional thread that was needed in different colors to make this sampler. Now, the same girl, so this is 1816, can you see that? This is her sampler 2 years later, 1818. We found these two are at the Putney Historical Society. This is at the Wyndham County Historical Society. So this is another thing that the Vermont Sampler Initiative is doing, is identifying bits and pieces of the same family. So now we're getting family histories coming together. Sometimes we're discovering the same teachers in very different samplers. That's a whole other level of information. I mean, I'm getting goosebumps talking about it because this really is brand new history that's being uncovered. Yeah.
The sampler, I think you should mention, is very rare because it's Dorset.
Yes.
And it's an important family. It's
Yes.
The Barrows house.
And
That's right.
they married at the Sykes.
That's right, and she has Dorset there too.
Experienced Barrows was.
Yep. It's all one color, it's monochromatic, it's not real fancy, but she has her name on it and she has Dorset on it. Yep. So this girl got to go, Sarah Blood got to go to school, perhaps, in Brattleboro from living in Putney, and she learned to do something a lot fancier, right? She had to have a teacher. Her mother possibly could have taught her to do this because it was the same thing the mother learned, okay? But she had to go to a school to learn this. So you see there's I'm guessing this is a wisteria kind of border here, right? And she's got her uppercase letters, and she's got uppercase again, but a different stitch. This is cursive, this is block letters, and then here's the lowercase ABCs, and the numbers 1 through 8 here. So the finances for the family must have been such that they were able to go from the mother, basically, perhaps, we don't know for sure, but perhaps teaching the daughter how to do this much. And then the finances for the family allowed for her to go someplace else to learn to do this fancy work here with all the different, this is a very common border, it's called the strawberry border. We see it over and over and over again. Very faded, but strawberries there at the top, okay? I'm assuming this is wisteria. These are dividing lines. You see between each line of alphabet, there's a dividing line right there. It takes time to do all of this, right? Okay, so another type of sampler, we're still talking about types now, are classmate samplers, where girls who went to school with each other maybe would have made one as a memento for her friend. Okay, so this is Densey Lee made it. This is for Polly Lyman in Royalton in the state of Vermont, September 11, 1801. Densey Lee is my name. Now remember this part. We see this little piece of poetry over and over again. Densey Lee is my name. English is my nation. Mount Washington, the place of my abode, and Christ is my salvation. We see this over and over and over again. So teachers must have been teaching kids, girls all over the state. There's a real interesting one, I think it's from Randolph, where she finished it off saying, Randolph is my dwelling place, a pleasant situation. So she leaves off the part about Christ being my salvation, but a pleasant situation.
She's a bit of a poet herself.
Apparently, yes. Another type of sampler is called the darning sampler. And the motif on the left is the center that you're seeing right here. So girls not only had to learn to stitch for literacy reasons, let's call it, right? Learning how to spell their own name, you learn cursive, all of that, but they also had to learn some very functional stitches, which was darning. And so they had to make a pattern piece to demonstrate how well their mending skills were, right? It was important back then. You know, if you had raised the flax and if you had tended the sheep, such that on your family farm you were able to produce linen and woolen fabric. When you got a hole in it, you did not just throw it out the next day, right? You mended it. And so making a sampler of your various mending stitches was an important type of sampler. Another type of sampler is the family record. Now these are obviously very advanced, right? All three of these happen to be at the Bennington Museum. So a girl didn't do this on day 2, right? She didn't do this the day after she finished her very elementary marking sampler, right? She had some years under her belt by the time she made something like this, which was a family record, births, deaths, marriages, etc. A memorial sampler was something that a girl might have made to memorialize that someone had died. In this case, this was done by Felinda Lamb of Townsend, Vermont. She was 13 when she made this, but genealogy research says her mother died when she was 2. And so we think that perhaps what we're looking at here is her image of her mother and little girl dressed in black. Yeah, sad, right? So sweet. So that's at age 13, you see, that a girl could do something like this from maybe she started at age 5. We don't know for sure. And then the highest level of needlework is something that's called a silk on silk needlework. And this happens to be one that's a piece of Christian iconography, the return from Egypt. Those who are Christians recognize that this is part of the story of the Christ child and his parents returning from having fled to Egypt. So this is very, very high level needlework that a girl could have produced. And the reason why it was high level is because this is silk stitching on silk. If you made a mistake with a pinprick and a piece of silk, it stayed there. You could not just with your fingers rub it away. So that's why by the time you got to producing silk on silk, your family had expended considerable resources to get you to the point where you could have stitched for years before you produced something that was so good that you could not make an error because it would show up on the silk ground fabric. Okay, let's talk a little bit about size, shape, dimensions now. And you know, in a nutshell, I think you could say what I have to show you today is bigger, the bigger the sampler. This is 16.5 inches wide, 13 inches tall. Bigger takes more time, right? It's a bigger piece than say a 7x8 or a 5x8. It's takes more materials, therefore it's more expensive, right? It's a bigger piece of fabric instead of a smaller piece of fabric. And time plus materials in any project, right? Everybody knows time plus materials is money. So this is a very unusual, I think this might be the most unusual sampler we've discovered. It's by a 9-year-old girl, okay? So maybe she started at age 5. It's extremely rare. I mean, look at the ship. I think it might be the only sampler we've found yet that has a ship like this with the blue fish in the water. There are some red coats up here at the top. Look at that. Never seen red coats on any kind of a sampler anywhere. Was she listening to people tell stories about having served in the Revolutionary War? Who knows? Was she listening to men who had been out on ships, out on whaling ships, and then came up the Connecticut River, such that she would have heard this kind of thing, you know, growing up in Brattleboro? Hard to say, but it's a fun piece to research. Okay, borders and bands and dividing lines. Again, this is all additional. This is not just functional now, right? This is purely decorative. So this girl, maybe she had a teacher teaching her all these different stitches, all these different motifs. She was allowed to do her basic ABCs. She's got a text here in the middle, and then she's got all this really decorative. That's a lot more time. She was allowed to be away from the family farm, perhaps, let's say. She was in a classroom somewhere. It might have been a local woman's front parlor. Would have been like a sewing, could have been like a sewing circle kind of thing, you know, that an older woman had in her front parlor. And girls came in for part of the day, and that's where they learned. So anyway, the girl's family, this is a sign that the girl's family, this is from Connecticut, Stonington, Connecticut, back in 1769, right? The family could afford for the girl to be away from the family, away from doing any kind of household tasks, and just learning to do functional and yet decorative kind of stitching. On this sampler, you can see 8 different dividing lines. So not only, and look at this huge decorative band right here, these were all different kinds of strawberries, okay? So not only did she demonstrate that she knew her ABCs, but she also separated them off with different dividing bands, decorative bands, all different kind of motifs here at the bottom. And I really like the motif here, right? Oh, may I be blessed with all that heaven can send. Long life, long pleasure, and a friend. I love it. That's one of my favorite ones. So here's another one of, I love the verse on here too. This is the 1848 sampler made in Dorchester, now residing in Vermont, by Lucy Ann Hill, age 11. The hand of the diligent shall bear rule, but the slothful shall be under tribute. So down in Dorchester, Mass, they were very serious. Yeah, they were serious about the idea of hard work, right, and not being slothful, right. So that's one of my favorite ones too. So anyway, this thing about we're learning what the values of the society were when you read text like this. So not only has she told us her name, her date, or how old she was, where she was from, but also the value of society. Yeah.
When you look in the sampler, it says under, and then there seems to be another word.
Under, let's
It's
see.
tribute, trib.
Tribute.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
Started it, didn't have room, ran out of rooms.
We don't know who her teacher was, but yes, there was something missing in the planning there, right? Yeah, good point. Very often we do see errors. We do see errors where, they thought they had enough space to do 1 to 10, and they get to like 7, and then 8 and 9 has to be here, and 10 has to be up here. So, yeah.
Okay, I just didn't read that part.
Yeah, under tribute. There you go. Good point. Good point.
What does under tribute mean?
I think like paying tribute. You will always be paying the man.
It's a quote from the Bible.
There you go. It's a quote from the Bible. There you go. That makes sense. The hand of it would be one of the Psalms, perhaps.
Proverbs, chapter 12.
The hand of the diligent shall rule. I guess you could say, but the slothful shall be under tribute. Always paying to the man. Because your sloth, your laziness is not going to lead you to be the man.
You're not getting tribute. You're under tribute.
You're under
I
tribute.
got it now.
There you
Okay.
go. There you go. Yeah, thank you, Sue. Here's another one. I really like this one too. Very monochromatic now, right? Not a whole lot of color going on here. We don't know what the finances were. We don't know what the local resources were. But so this is from Randolph, age 12 she is. This is up at the DAR mansion in Addison. Oh yeah, industry promotes virtue and happiness. Choose what is most fit. I love this. Industry and perseverance are sure indications of female work.
Ooh!
Don't you love it? And then this is probably the second most common verse. The Jesus permit thy gracious name to stand as the first effort of an infant hand. And while her fingers o'er the canvas move, engage her tender heart to seek thy love. With thy dear children, let her have a part, and write thy name thyself upon her heart. We see that one also over and over and over again. So a lot of Christian influence here in Vermont especially, but I think you could say New England in general. Okay, so this one was made in Middletown Springs by a 9-year-old. Again, the motif, the verse that she stitched here is really what caught my eye. Know then this truth, though for man to know that virtue alone is happiness below. All right? So she was able to, she demonstrated that she knew her ABCs. She demonstrated her name, right? Can you see the Fanny Clark, her sampler, wrought the 9th year of her age. And then this is a decorative band. She was allowed to stitch there. So this is a decorative band. This is a decorative band. Here's the very large strawberry motif again. So this, again, this is another example of a girl who She not only went and learned to master her ABCs and know how to spell her name, but then the family finances were allowed for her to produce a piece like this that was more decorative, and also her teacher made sure she could demonstrate that she understands what a virtuous woman was all about. This is another thing that samplers were meant to do. They were supposed to demonstrate, once the family had paid for this, and she brought this home, this was framed and put on the wall so that all the suitors who came to the front room of the house could see that this girl that they were interested in was fit to be a wife and mother. She knew how to stitch, she was literate, and she had the right virtue in mind to be able to be a proper mother. Right, Kevin?
But
What?
she's 9.
We started girls early. Come on.
Was
Yeah,
that
John.
legal?
I can't really read it from here, but how do you know that's from Middletown?
Middletown Springs, up
Yeah, she didn't
above.
put it on there, did she? It could have come from the donor, because it's now at Shelburne Museum. It could have been a family piece, and so they provided the genealogy. Yeah, good question.
Because there is a Clark family in Middletown, but there are two Middletowns in Vermont.
Wow.
So that's why I asked.
So let's hope that at the Shelburne, they only accepted it if it had proper documentation, right?
Right. One would hope.
So this is interesting. This is, again, talk about socioeconomics here. There's a little bit of frugality going on. You've got two sisters who worked the same sampler. Louisa Lake was 14 years old in 1842, and Cornelia Lake worked at age 14 also in 1850. So, you know, again, talking about the socioeconomics of this is really pretty plain, right? There's nothing too fancy here. The family maybe could afford to send two girls to learn their ABCs and to learn to spell their name, and that was about it, okay? Nothing too fancy going on here. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the symbols and other motifs and scenes that you might see. This is a piece at the Bennington Museum. It says, this sampler was wrought by Abigail Wilder of Ludlow, 14 years of age, the 23rd September 1820. Now this is a rather common theme also. Man's life is like a morning flower, cut down and withered in an hour. Unfortunately, I have to say, we do see this emphasis on death and early death over and over and over again. Girls very much, you know, people were used to seeing many women die in childbirth, right? I mean, it's amazing to me that we didn't have penicillins until the 1940s. How did the human race survive without penicillin until the 1940s, right? So these girls knew very early on, you know, death was almost a constant shadow in their lives. And Chloe Wilder, preceptress, is what this says.
Oh.
So she could have put, but didn't put a dividing line around this, okay?
Oh.
So this is Chloe Wilder, a distant cousin of hers. The research shows Chloe Wilder was her teacher. Preceptress is another word for teacher. And so the Vermont Sampler Project is also weaving together bits and pieces about who were the women who taught these skills too. Who were the teachers who passed on these kind of skills to girls. Okay, now this is here at the Dorset, one of the two, right, John? Dorset Historical
We have two, yeah.
Samplers, yep. This is by Esther Bullard. Is my name, here's that phrase I told you is very common. English is my nation, Clarendon is my dwelling place, and Christ is my salvation. Now note, do you see the British crown motif on here?
No.
She didn't put a date on it, but right here is the British crown,
Oh.
right? To me, that's very interesting. How far did we have to get away from the American Revolution for the British crown to stop being a common motif that you would see in things like girls' needlework? This is
isn't
not the first.
dated?
I'm sorry?
This isn't dated?
This one is not dated, no. Do you know, John, do you have much information about this one?
I can't remember off the top of my head. I believe that the research I did was coming up with not very much.
Not very much. That's my memory too.
My thought is she either married or died young, so later records are either non-existent or married young.
Yeah. yeah, even with Ancestry and Family Search, it doesn't provide all the information we need. There's a sampler that is by a Norton girl. Norton is a big name out of Bennington, right? Norton Pottery and all that. Cannot find the connection from this Norton girl, and it says Bennington on it. Cannot find the connection to the Norton family, so it just happens, you know. So some more interesting symbols, and when you get to know your symbols, you can now start to locate. For example, on this sampler here, the white dove outlined in black like that, that's a very definite symbol for the Deerfield Valley, Deerfield, Massachusetts. So we know there were schools starting down in Connecticut, Hartford, etc., that then moved up the Connecticut Valley. And in Deerfield especially, well, Deerfield Village, right, the historic Deerfield Village we have today. So anyway, so once you get to recognize the different motifs, even if there's not a location on it, you can sometimes start searching Massachusetts maybe, you know, to find more about that sampler. This one is really cute. This is at the Bennington Museum. I love the kind thing is the right thing. It makes me wonder if maybe that's a Quaker. It just strikes me that might be a Quaker kind of verse, you know. The interesting thing is you have the two twins, right? Ruth Stratton and Ruby Stratton, both born December 9th, 1833. And if you had a chance to turn the sampler over, you would see there's a seam line. It's two pieces of fabric right here. And then they stitched it together and then embroidered over it so you wouldn't see that seam line. I'm guessing one girl made the top, one girl made the bottom, and then they put it together as twins might do, right? I've never seen a sampler like that before. That's two halves stitched together like that by a couple of twins. Okay, more special symbols. The alphabet that you see at the top is very definitely known as Quaker, the Quaker set of alphabets, all right? So this is interesting. This tells us that Mary Morrison, who was from Danby, Vermont, her family had resources to be able to send her to the Nine Partners School over in New York State, down, let's see, I looked it up just last night. It's south of Albany, north of I-84, is where the Nine Partners School still is in existence today. So this girl from Danby, Vermont, her family had enough that they could send her away to boarding school to be able to stitch something as fine as this. These are called half medallions right here. That's known to be another Quaker kind of motif. So once you start seeing certain motifs over and over again, you can start recognizing even if a date or a town is not listed or not stitched on the sampler.
And the B is for boarding school, huh?
I think so. I think so. Yes, I think you're right. Yeah, good point. Yeah, good point, Sue. Yeah.
And
Okay,
Danby
let's
was
talk a
known
little bit
for-
about materials. I'm sorry?
Danby was known for a lot of Quakers.
That's right,
Yeah.
that's right. There was a Quaker
Oh,
community.
Wilmington.
In fact, I think there was a school right across the line in Granville, John. There was a Quaker school in Granville.
That rings a bell. There is a Quaker Street to this day.
So there you go. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more now about materials, because, so know that at this time, you only could work, the only materials that were available were cotton or linen for your ground fabric, wool or silk for your embroidery stitches. Everybody could go grow flax, and everybody did. And from the flax, you could spin and weave linen. Okay, so you could make your own linen fabric. Everybody had sheep for lots of reasons, right? But if you had a flock of sheep, you could spin your own yarn and weave your own fabric. So a sampler that's made of linen and wool is more likely to be local material and lower resources, fewer resources perhaps of the family than something that was made with silk embroidery. You had to buy that silk embroidery somewhere, right? There either had to be a peddler who came through your town, and you know, I can very easily imagine a peddler, you know, inside his coat having a pouch, and in that pouch were all these silk threads. That's my fantasy. It would have been easy, right? They're not heavy. He could have transported a silk fabric or a silk embroidery thread here, there, and everywhere. This is from Arlington. We don't know for sure if it's silk or wool embroidery, but this here, can you see the mend right there? That's the fabric, the ground fabric that the stitching is on has actually been mended there. So there's a sampler, look at it, very, very monochromatic, you know, perhaps the girl made it on a piece of linen. You're not gonna throw out that linen. We work too hard to spin that yarn and weave that linen fabric. We're not gonna throw it away just because it has a hole on it. We're gonna mend it, and then we're gonna use it to make the daughter's sampler, okay? They probably had to know a little bit about dyeing, or if this is wool, maybe it's from a black sheep, but, you know, there's not enough here to indicate color of any kind, right? So they worked with what they had, with the knowledge that they had too. Okay, so here's another one from the Dorset Historical Society. This is silk on linen, made by Julia Holden, and this is another very common phrase. When this you see, remember me. I think that's kind of sweet, right? So, not terribly fancy, but again, there's that British crown, right? It's right here hanging off of the tree, or in the bottom decorative band. We call this the decorative band, okay? So here's her signature, Julia W. Holden, age 10, March 31, 1806, when this you see, remember me. And then she's got her lowercase alphabets here, and then hanging off the tree is the crown. So this is 1806. So again, how far away did we have to get? We have, the state of Vermont was 1791, right? So we're talking about, we're officially a state. Why were girls still putting the British crown into their embroidery? Good topic for research, right? Okay, so here's the one that I think has gone, there it is. Yeah. I'm glad Nancy brought it in. We don't know for sure if this is wool or silk embroidery, but it's on a linen ground, saying Amelia Barrows is my name, English is my nation, Dorset is my dwelling place, and she wasn't willing or able to finish it, for whatever reason. Maybe she wasn't able to. You know, the family needed her on the farm, perhaps, right? This is a farm family. Again, very monochromatic, but yes, valuable because I think it's the only one.
You know, I think she didn't have time to finish because after dwelling place, she actually put in and.
And
Yeah, she stopped.
she started it.
She married a Sykes, she lived in the hollow all the way at the end.
Sykes, S-Y-K-E-S.
Sykes Hollow.
Uh-huh.
And she lived a long life, she died in 1906, I think that was, she was born around 1818, something like that.
Very cool. Very good. Very cool to know that.
Years, God.
Very cool to know that. Okay, and then next, let's see, we do have this sampler. This is Emily Ward's sampler. Yeah. This is Emily Ward's, no, this is Catherine. This is Catherine Avery.
This one?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, sorry, I jumped ahead of myself. We're gonna talk about this one in a minute. This is another, the Emily Ward sampler is by another Dorset family, but Emily was living in Duxbury at the time. And I think it's kind of sweet that she puts Emily Ward Duxbury and then Emily Ward Duxbury. She wants you to know her name was Emily Ward of Duxbury. And you know, it's a little bit primitive, right? Maybe she didn't have the most educated teacher teaching her to make her sampler, but it has some color to it, right? It's not just monochromatic. So the family was able to have her, you know, sit with the teacher and learn how to do this, and invested a little bit of money perhaps. You know, this is a different color, the age 10 years is a different color, and the little house over here, and the bird. I think it's sweet she put Robin underneath the bird. It says Robin, for you to know that she knew. Okay, so that's another, they live in Dorset now, but Emily, their ancestor lived in Duxbury. Age 10.
Looks like it's 50.
That's just the way, yeah, that's just the way the ones were made, Sue.
The one?
Yeah, that's a one.
Oh, actually,
So-
there it is next to the 18, it's in the 1851.
That's right.
Oh, golly,
That's
yeah.
it, yeah. No, I know what you mean. It does,
Weird.
to me, it looks like an S too, but it's the way they did ones, yeah. And she didn't have a number series, does she? She doesn't have 1 to 10.
Ah,
So that's as close as she got to learning her numbers. 1941. Okay, this is a real minor detail. Who can afford, again, a self edge literally means the self edge to the fabric. So if you look at this sampler right here, this is the selvage and this is the selvage. When the warps were put on the loom, the wefts went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, weaving the fabric now, right? We're just talking about weaving the fabric. And when the weft went back and forth in the shuttle, back and forth and back and forth, it didn't leave an end hanging out. It turned and went back the other way, right? So if you started your thread here, it went over to this side, it turned around and went back, and turned around and went back. And that's how the selvedges were made. It's a nice clean edge. It's the way fabric was made, right? If you could afford to, you used that selvage vertically, because the warp yarns were so much stronger than the weft yarns that went back and forth. Okay, so that's another clue that in this sampler, Jet Beebe is her name. Beebe's the local name, isn't it, John? But this was from Connecticut. So the Beebe family, we know, came up from Connecticut. So, and the other, did you see this? These are upside down?
Yeah.
Yeah. So at some point, it seems to me, more research needs to be done. She started the sampler working in this direction, got maybe this far to the Z, and then maybe put it down for years, maybe until maybe she got married, and then picked it up again and started it again from this direction. All right? You see that occasionally. It does work that way.
What does it say on the bottom?
Well, this is upside down, so
Yeah.
this is A, B, C, D, E,
Oh, I
F,
see.
G. She started her alphabet
Oh,
again
oh, I
here,
see.
but upside
Oh.
down. Yeah. So anyway, so the point there is, if you could afford to, you put this, you did your embroidery on the piece of fabric with the selvedges going vertically, because those vertical yarns were stronger. Okay?
Do you have any idea of the time frame it would take a young girl to do a sampler?
I really don't, Glenn. Maybe somebody who's been studying samplers longer than I could give you a figure on that, but you know, again, it would depend. Was the girl able to see the teacher every day, once a week, once a month, or just in summer season or winter season or something like that? You know, I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. It's certainly worth researching, but I think time is a resource, right? However much time you had to put into it, that's how long it took. Okay, so now let's talk about the stitch types that you're apt to see in a girl's sampler. The cross stitch is the most common, and the edging stitch, or the buttonhole stitch is called, is almost equally common, I think I can say. The beautiful thing there, once you learned about making this buttonhole stitch, all of these letters here are made of that buttonhole stitch. Guess what? You now had a skill for making garments where you could use buttons on the garment, because you could make buttonholes once you learned that stitch, okay? So that's an extremely valuable one. So here's your basic cross stitch pattern. Sometimes there are many samplers are just completely cross stitch. That's all the girl learned was cross stitch, okay? But then the more advanced teachers were able to teach more functional stitches, such as the buttonhole stitch. And you know, it could be a big hole, do the buttonhole stitch all the way around it, you could put a belt through it now, right? A belt or a button, or you know, a loop of some kind through that hole, because you now could bind the raw edge. So that was a very important stitch. Okay, let's look finally at a few fancier samplers now. This is a beautiful one that's in a private collection. It's from Danville, Vermont. This girl was 14 years old in 1835, and she lists Mrs. Atkins as her instructress. It's especially beautiful because the green color there is still so very, very bright. We found Mrs. Atkins again, this sampler, very similar kind of sampler, right, to the one that I just showed you, right? Aren't they similar? The inn over here with the sign out here that says inn, the group of buildings right here, the trees behind, there it is again. Mrs. Atkins is the instructress again. So this is at the Vermont Historical Society. The first one is in a private collection. So again, this is one of the wonderful things that's happening with the Vermont Sampler Initiative. We're finding all these little bits and pieces and able to put together the story of girls' education in Vermont. Okay, here's another one from the Peachum Historical Society. It's got a little bit of fading going on, wouldn't you say? But she's got all of her letters of the alphabet. She's got four sets of alphabets there at the top, and the decorative band at the bottom, and her name with age 12, completed in 1834. There's no teacher's name on this, and there's no biblical quotation or poem, but as you can see, a lot of time went into producing this very, very dainty, very, very nicely executed border here at the bottom, and in fact all the way around. So this transferred. I'm working with the Westminster Historical Society right now. They are able to show not only the samplers that they have, but then they also have the paper patterns that would have happened next, and then a piece of a lace collar, a white on white embroidered cuff, actually it is, that shows this is how the girls first learned to stitch. This was their example of their stitching. Then there would have been some paper patterns available. Maybe you were able to buy them in Boston. Printed patterns, ink on white paper. And then that's, with those patterns, then they used that to decorate clothing. So that's the step-by-step process that's happening here. Girls started learning to do this, and then they were able to graduate, being wives and mothers next, right? That was the goal. Then they could ornament sheets, pillows, clothing. Okay, here's another one, also from Peachum, by Miss Lucy Field. And I think it's, to me, it looks very similar. They're both at the Peachum Historical Society. And to me, they're, the daintiness, you know, of the border on three sides now, and the way the trees, and I love the two bluebirds of happiness there. Aren't they sweet? Okay, so let's go back here, and now let's start talking about resources for validating a sampler maker. I showed you this earlier. Remember, this is Sarah Blood and her mother. Her mother's initials are here, AB. This is Sarah's first sampler done in 1816. Here she is. She went to school now and learned to do this in 1818. How do we know? How can we figure this out? Well, via a search on Family Search or Ancestry.com. This is how I figured out. Putney Historical Society didn't know this, but her mother's name was Anna, okay? And so she embroidered A and her married name, Blood, onto her sampler. And then here's Sarah, along with all of her siblings listed. Another clue that you can have is the 1810 census. Now this is for Putney, right? The town of Putney. The 1810 census, believe it or not, asked you to itemize everything that your home produced. Everything. How many looms, how many spinning wheels, how many yards of wool and linen and blended fabric, how many yards did your family produce? See, linen cloth right here, woolen cloth, cotton cloth, and a mixed cloth, and a loom. So I cut and pasted this together to show you, here were the three Blood men. Only men, of course, were listed in 1810, right? Here's her father, though, Oliver. Here are the number of children and all in people in the family, and they're for some reason they're producing 40 yards of woolen cloth, but they don't have a loom. So I'm assuming maybe these were his. I think these are his brothers. The brothers had looms, so maybe the girls in the family had to go next door to the next farm over to actually do weaving that they needed for the family. That's time away from the home, right? That's time that she couldn't sit in a classroom learning how to do needlework because she had to go over to a relative's house to help with the weaving. Thanks for coming, Pagan. So that's just it's a little bit of an aside, but it's another view into the kind of households that these girls came out of. And I find the 1810 census just fascinating for that reason. Okay, so before we talk about the individual samplers that are here, I wanted to tell you, next summer, summer 2025, there's going to be, in connection with the national 250th celebration of America's founding, right? I think you haven't heard a whole lot about it yet. The advertising hasn't started. But 2025 will be celebrating the 1775, right, start of the American Revolution. And so the Vermont is going to be doing a lot. The Vermont Historical Society is going to be pulling together many, many activities to celebrate that commemoration, let's say. And so I've already started approaching different collections, places that I know have collections, like the Bennington Museum, and on up to Rutland and Middlebury, and on up to Shelburne, and over to Montpelier, and way up there to Brownington that has the 26 samplers. So I'm calling individuals now to see if they would like to participate, and it's at no cost to any of the sites to participate. So I'm hoping you'll be able to convince John that DHS needs to be part of the tour. The Bennington Museum, of course, they're having their very fine collection.
Would the samplers be brought to the Dorset Historical Society?
Yes, that would be my job. That'd be my job, to
All right,
approach
so-
private collectors
Okay, that's a-
like yourselves to see if they would like to have some of their samplers on exhibit at the local historical
And
society.
how long is this going to take?
It'll be from May through October, the general tourist season next year, May 30th to October, whatever it is, Columbus Day and
Well,
Yeah.
Indigenous Day, is that what we're supposed to call it now?
Oh, yeah, right.
In October. So the Chafee Gallery in Rutland has already committed. I mean, they're not a historical society, but they've already committed that yes, they'd be happy to host, have a wall full. I'm just asking all of these different places if they would have at least 6 samplers on exhibit, so that when visitors make take the time to drive to your site, they would see at least 6 samplers. So my job would be to find John for at least 4 additional samplers, so he would have a nice exhibit here in addition to the 2 that you looked at already. So let's look at, people brought in some very nice, you've seen the Dorset sampler, yes, going around, okay. This is Catherine Amory Chandler's work. She was actually in Massachusetts, but the sampler is in Vermont now, so this has been documented. And these owners were nice enough to write out the genealogy for Catherine on the back paper, the brown paper, and so we, of course, kept that, and that's part of the documenting the genealogy. So it's a very simple sampler, but it's in very good condition. The family's kept it in very good condition.
Now, she did that sampler in Massachusetts, or
That's
she
right.
did it in Vermont?
No, she did it in Massachusetts.
But you still consider it a Vermont sampler? Why?
Because it's here now.
Because it's here.
It lives here now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, that's a really good question, but I'll tell you, we've uncovered some very, very interesting stories. I'm making it my job to research back at least to the Revolutionary War generation to see what were these girls' ancestors doing at the time of the Revolution. And in fact, that's the only thing I'm asking the sites that will be on the driving tour. I'm asking them to have 6 on display, and in the label that goes next to the 6, please explain this girl's connection, her ancestors' connection to the Revolutionary War. Yeah. There was one I was looking at just the other night. It was from Connecticut, and the girl died out in Ohio. Her ancestor had bought the Western Reserve from the state of Connecticut and set up what is today's Ohio and helped survey what became the city of Cleveland. I mean, it's just amazing stuff. And the owners don't know this stuff. We had a sampler came to us in Brownington 2 weeks ago. It's from Dorchester, Mass, but it's here in Vermont now. Very rare. The whole sampler is stitched, right? Like if you see a sampler like this, you're looking at a lot of brown fabric, right? All this tan here, that's the background. The sampler I'm telling you about that we saw in Brownington, the whole thing is stitched, solid.
Where's that one from?
And then the motifs are stitched on top. And there were 2 African-American figures in it, one in this corner and one in this corner. You never see that. Extremely valuable.
And that was in Brownington?
Brownington.
Well, Alexander Twilight probably had something to do with that.
Yeah, but this was not connected with his family.
Oh,
No, not at all, yeah. And the owner had no idea. She brings in this thing that's worth, who knows, $500,000 or something, because it's so rare. And she had no idea, how did it come into the family? I had no idea why it was hanging on her grandmother's wall all these years.
But do you find that, you know, perhaps something was originated in Massachusetts, but the family moved,
Of course.
to Vermont?
Of course.
And that's why it's in the family?
Of course, yeah, either the family migrated, you're right, that's exactly the story. After the revolution, many families moved north. Sometimes they came through New Hampshire and then settled in Vermont and then kept moving. But a lot of them stayed. After the revolution, there was this huge migration from Connecticut, from Rhode Island. You know, this thing about, out-of-staters moving to Vermont, it's been going on a long time. A long time, right? A long time. So yeah, here's another one, very densely worked. Look at that.
Who's that one from?
Hmm?
Where's she from?
That's in private hands. Let's see, is it St. Danville or St. Johnsbury or Kirby? Is that the Kirby one? St. Johnsbury by Dolly Townsend. St. Johnsbury.
That's a nice one.
Yeah.
Why do they call them samples?
Because, good question, because when they first started back in Europe, let's say, ladies, upper class ladies who learned to do this kind of thing, they weren't out in the fields monitoring the sheep. They were indoors learning they had a piece of fabric that was a sample. It was a sample of all the stitches they knew. And they would keep it in their sewing basket and refer to it, you know, and maybe add, as they invented new stitches, they would add, and that was their, sometimes called an exemplar. An exemplar, examples. Good question, I kind of jumped right over that. Yeah, jumped right over that.
And when they made them,
Yeah.
they just worked on a blank,
They what?
when they actually made soaps, whatever they call it.
Sampler.
Did they like mark it out in pencil or pen first, or they just worked on a blank fabric? Just
That's a good question. I think it probably came down to who the teacher was. And if the teacher had, was a really experienced teacher, she could tell them, perhaps, cut it, fold it in fourths, this is your middle, and let's maybe work out from the center. That's a very good question. I don't know if anybody knows exactly how you taught somebody to make a sampler.
because if people do that now, you can buy.
Counted cross stitch.
You can come with patterns, right?
That's right. Today it's so much easier.
Yeah, no,
So much easier.
They did this from nothing. Incredible.
That's right. You're exactly right. You're exactly right. Yeah, today it's called counted cross stitch, and it's usually worked on a fabric that the threads are 2 by 2 by 2 by 2.
Okay.
And so it's very easy to see, oh yeah, my stitch needs to be over 2 stitches. Here you had to count every 2 stitches.
Back in the dark ages, I remember in school, you couldn't get out a home ec. You had to make a cloth with all the different buttonholes.
Okay.
And then you had to make a cloth with all the embroidery, so you had satin stitches, a French
Yeah.
knot,
Yeah.
cross stitch, I can't even
Wow.
remember. But, and to hit the question he asked, you had to do it on a white, in our school, you had to do it on a white piece of cloth.
And where were you in school?
A farm school in the middle of Illinois.
No kidding.
Like out in,
Yep.
we weren't even, they called it a consolidated school.
Yep.
We weren't even near a town. But I'm no great seamstress, but you couldn't get out. There was no way to graduate until you
You had
produced.
to know that.
Yeah, the guys went to shop and the girls went to home ec,
Yep.
and you had to produce that.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
Let's see, so what else did I want to show you? I wanted to show you this one. This is a little harder to pass around. But look how pretty the decorative band at the bottom here is. So unfortunately now, she has a whole family genealogy here. And she has her name here. But you can't see it because it has totally faded, right? Unfortunately, now remember this, no matter who you are, no matter what you collect, silk and watercolors are the 2 most sensitive things to light damage. Okay, John already knows that. So when it comes to samplers, unfortunately, many samplers are silk stitching on a linen ground. And depending on the dye that was used, the dye was more or less sensitive to light exposure. And so that's why entire portions of a sampler disappear. Its stitching is still there, but the color completely faded out. Now I'm of 2 minds about this, because I'm a conservator, and so I really would like to re-stitch that back on.
Would that
on
hurt the
top
value
of,
though?
what's that?
That would hurt the value if you did that.
I don't think so, do you? I don't think so. Wouldn't you think it would look better hanging on your wall if you could read that?
But Michelle,
Yeah.
you can read that on the left-hand side some. I mean, this is when you're talking is not very legible.
Yeah, this whole thing here. Her name is there,
But you,
Versher is there.
if you really wanted to though, I mean, you can see some of it, right? But you can also feel it for the texture, right?
Well, yeah.
But this really is blank over here, right? This side.
That is blank.
Yeah.
And
And
that's why you can't
curious.
see that, that's blank.
That's curious on that side, that the whole thing's blank, like maybe she didn't finish the genealogy.
It didn't disappear,
See,
did it?
so here's another one.
It's faded in the middle there.
Yeah, it's like a little piece of the design is missing, because whatever dye they used to do these letters is faded. And her name and all is, and the date is right there. You can no longer see it. What do you think?
That's beautiful.
I mean, I'm really of a mind with my own to put a piece of gauze out of the frame. Of course, you take this all out of the frame. To put a piece of gauze on the backside and then stitch on top of this through the gauze, so that if you wanted to, at any time, if anybody in the future owns this, they would know, oh, that has been stitched on top of, it's been top stitched. And if anybody in the future would say, oh, I really want it back to its original like this. Okay, we'll just take that stitching out and you've got it. I just really believe that any artist really does not want their name to totally disappear. And you guys are art dealers, right? Isn't that
Yes.
the truth?
Yes.
No artist wants their name to be obliterated, right?
Correct.
But a collector would have a problem if you played with the name. A true collector would.
It's restoration.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
restoration.
You have a painting that's
restoration.
restored, it depends on what the restoration is, but if it's a majority, then it's a major problem.
How do you mean now?
Well, for example, there are arts, paintings out there, we specialize in a marine artist, and the whole sky was almost obliterated and has to be in-painted. Now, the rule of thumb, if it's less than 10%, it's okay, but if it's a 40 or 50%
Yeah.
restoration. it
Yeah,
really
then
does.
that
The
would
value of
affect the
painting.
value, wouldn't it?
Now, what you're doing, to me, if it's less than 10%, it's okay.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, thank you. That makes sense to me. And like I say, I'm really quite sure any artist really doesn't want their name to disappear.
And some people don't care. That they don't care that it's restored because it looks prettier.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. The aesthetics. And good point, Glenn. I'm thinking that as the generations go on, I mean, like, I'm one of 6 children. My husband is one of 6 children. Out of those 12 people, I am the only one who has any appreciation for history. 1 out of 12. You know? And so I'm thinking as the generations go on, that situation is gonna get worse and worse and
And you're
worse.
right. Young
Doesn't
people,
your husband
young
sound-
people
It has to look
don't, young
good.
people don't collect this stuff.
See, there
They
you
don't
go.
care.
See, there you go.
Antiques, they don't care about.
Especially if it
Samples,
doesn't
they
look
don't
good.
care about.
Especially if it doesn't look good. You know, who's gonna put something on the wall that's all faded? You can't even read anymore.
Are you the only one of 12? What about your husband? Isn't he in this?
I'm one of 6. He's one of 6.
I understand, but you said you were one of 12.
The 6 in my family plus the 6.
Yeah.
The 6 siblings in
Yeah.
mine plus
Him,
6 is
him.
12. That's 12.
I understand, but
She
he
says her
doesn't have.
husband doesn't care either.
I'm the only one of all those 12 people.
John doesn't care about history?
I-
Yeah,
I-
doesn't care about history,
I'm the only one who does, out of 12.
and your husband doesn't either?
No,
Oh.
There's 2 schools.
he's married to me, so he tries, but he kind of fakes it. He fakes it.
I was just asked, did they use stretchers when they made these to help keep the line straight?
They used what was called a frame, an
Yeah,
embroidery
yeah,
frame.
yeah.
Yeah, not like the hoops that
Yeah,
you see today.
yeah.
Yeah, that'd be too damaging.
But some
So
people
there's
used
a
to put,
frame.
some people used to, well, I call it a stretch. They put it on a frame and you could
Yeah.
tighten it.
Yeah.
And then when you took it off, it made sure the lines were straight.
Yeah, well, you had to pay attention, no
Oh,
doubt.
yeah,
No doubt.
absolutely.
And it had to be perfect. The fabric had to be perfectly
Yeah.
on grain
Yeah.
when you put it onto the embroidery frame.
Yeah.
Yeah, good
Yeah,
question.
I used to see a lot of people work on that from my mother's, not me, but from her generation. They all had stretchers. And
Yes,
it was
they knew how to do
beautiful.
it.
They were pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, not Not me.
I mean, yeah, like, see, like my youngest sister is 13 years younger than I am. She says she can't even, doesn't know how to thread a needle. How can this be? I said to her, we had the same parent, we had the same mother. How can you not even know how to thread a needle? But skills are getting lost, you know, and that's my fear. That's my fear, is that over the generations, fewer and fewer people are gonna appreciate these unless they look good. Unless they look good.
Have they studied how they did it? Now, there are people who do it the old-fashioned way, like in some of these living history type places.
Oh yeah, oh reproductions you mean?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we had somebody show up at the Sampler ID Day in Shelburne, and you know, she just handed us in her hand, you know, this 1786 sampler. I looked at it,
Brand new.
and my coordinator looked at it, and we went, this is a repro.
Polyester thread was a
Yeah,
good
that
one.
would be a giveaway.
You know? People, you're right, no, there are people women today who make beautiful, beautiful reproduction. I mean, they'll buy something, they'll buy an antique, you know, at an auction or something, and then they'll make a perfect modern copy of it.
I wasn't thinking about forgeries there or something,
No.
or fake. I was thinking about people who knew how to do it the old-fashioned way so they could fix these up.
There are women who are doing it the old-fashioned way.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah, and in fact, I even got into it a little bit with a woman on Facebook, and I was complimenting her work, and then I asked her something about, now, you did put your name on there, didn't you, and the date or whatever? And she said, oh yeah, I wrote it on the paper on the back. Not good enough, you know, that paper on the back can be, I mean, if somebody wanted to, right, you can buy something and pass it off as a 1786 sampler. Here's a story too. When I was at Colonial Williamsburg, I met a man who was the piano conservator there, and he was a British man. And he told me how he could take a piano, a new piano that he would make, bury it in his backyard for about 15 months. And when he dug it up again in 15 months, it would look like an antique piano.
Yeah.
So if you can do that with a piano, I think you can do it with a piece of fabric.
How many pianos did he have in his yard underground?
I don't know, he was at Williamsburg, I really don't know what he did in his free time. Let's see, did we get to see everything, did everybody get to see all these different samplers? And this one went around, didn't it? And then this one I showed you because I wanted you to see the, you know, the faded name here, and her, her F, G, H, and I, yeah, have totally faded. See, used a different kind of dye there, and the dye was, you know, more fugitive than the other dyes that were used. But Kirby, Vermont, way for the Northeast Kingdom.
So, is there, protective glass available?
Yeah, good question. Let's see, on the back of yours?
I think mine does have to pay.
Yeah, it tells you ultraviolet, this is what you want, ultraviolet filtering plexiglass, and it even tells you clean only with plastic cleaner. Yeah, if this is plexiglass and not glass, which you do want to do, you don't want a piece of glass on here that could possibly break and puncture the fabric. You do want plexiglass, but plexiglass is a plastic. And you don't want to use normal detergents which have ammonia in them because it darkens, makes it, after a while it gets foggy. It makes the plastic start to look foggy. But that's what you want.
That's
it.
okay,
Yeah, it's
great.
called ultraviolet. Any frame shop, if you tell them that's what you want, they've got it. Yeah, you just have to specify that. Okay? Thank you for bringing that in. Parvati and Dave brought this one in, their family piece. Yeah, so about the sampler search then, you know, if the sampler is here in Vermont, we wanna know about it. It doesn't have to just be, made in Vermont.
Are you looking for a certain date, like not past 18?
Oh, yeah, good question. Up to about the Civil War, you know, up to about 1860.
1860?
Yeah, a lot of people are bringing in the ones that are from the 1920s, which are not at all.
What is the oldest oldest sample you found so far? What year?
Could be ours,
1746,
1776.
I think.
1746.
Vermont?
Wow.
Does it say, well, Vermont was in the
No,
state?
from Dorchester. Yeah, no, you're right, you won't find anything that early here in Vermont.
The
We
one
were busy
that we
chopping
had,
down
the
trees.
Guilford, Vermont for 1776 is pretty good.
Okay, yeah, that's good.
But
Yeah,
Guilford
this
is my.
was 1740, it's in Vermont now, but it was from Dorchester, Mass.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll
Thank you
talk,
for coming.
we'll talk to John.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay,
Either
good.
one's
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michele. And before I let you all go, let me just do a little bit of letting you know of what's coming up. Our next third Thursday will be the third Thursday of July. John Reno, who's associated with the American Museum of Fly Fishing in Manchester, will be here to talk about the history of fly fishing. And in the meanwhile, not this Saturday, but the next Saturday, Art Gilbert and I will be leading a hike up to the Freedley Quarry, high above Emerald Lake. It's a great place. If you go every year, like I do, you get to see different graffiti every year. It's amazing. And then 2 weeks after that, in the middle of July, we'll have our ice cream social in conjunction with the library's dog days. So you get to go there for lunch at noon, over here for ice cream, and you're thinking, well, gosh, I need to build up an appetite. We're having a hike to the Folsom Quarry that same day in the morning. And that's a great quarry that never hit the water level. So you walk into a narrow entrance and you're surrounded by 50-foot walls of marble. Now, Michele mentioned the semi-sesquicentennial that's coming up next year. There have already been some events for it, like the Remember Baker arrest and all that down in East Charlington. There are a whole bunch of people making plans for next year. The 3 things to mark your calendar for are August 17th, 2024, when the Bennington 250 Committee will be having a fundraising gala dinner at the Equinox Hotel with a menu inspired by Revolutionary era food items. And that should be a lot of fun. If you go to Bennington250.org, you can buy tickets for that now. Get them while you can. And then May 10th, 2025, all kinds of things happened in 1775. The Westminster Massacre, Battle of Lexington and Concord, the seizure of Fort Ticonderoga. May 10th weekend, we're going to be having, each historical society along the way will be having different things to help people get up to Ticonderoga from Bennington on the route that the Green Mountain Boys did. And of course that went through Bennington, so we're involved with that. And then, it's, I go to these committee meetings. They're local historical societies. They're different business groups in Bennington County. They're national, regional. People from Quebec come to them. And I am beating the drum that the most important thing of 1775 was the first Dorset Convention. And I'm sure you all agree with me on that. And we'll be doing a reenactment thing for that as well. Still taking shape. So mark your calendars. Thank you. Thank you, Michele.
How long